Her sister whispered, "This stays between us." And from that moment, everything changed. The first time I saw her, I wasn't sure if it was curiosity or something deeper that pulled me in. She wasn't loud, didn't demand attention, but there was a gravity in the way she carried herself. A quiet confidence that made people naturally give her space, yet somehow drew me closer. She was in her early 40s, graceful in a way that only comes from experience, the kind of presence that seems effortless but speaks volumes. Her laugh, soft and knowing, echoed in the room long after she spoke, and I found myself noticing the little details. The way her hair caught the light, the way her fingers brushed against the stem of her wine glass. It was a casual family gathering, her sister hosting a small get-together, but the atmosphere shifted the moment she entered. Our eyes met briefly, just a flicker, and yet it was enough. There was a warmth there, subtle but undeniable. My heart gave an involuntary skip. I told myself it was nothing. She was older, sophisticated, and clearly lived a life I barely understood. But something about the way she moved, calm and measured, pulled me in deeper than I expected. Then her sister pulled me aside. Her words were whispered, almost conspiratorial. "This stays between us." The weight of those words made my stomach twist, not from fear, but from excitement, from the magnetic tension that now hung between her and me, amplified by the sister's knowing glance. There was a secret being shared, and somehow I was part of it. It was thrilling, intoxicating, and terrifying all at once. Later, I found myself watching her from across the room. She wasn't aware, or perhaps she was, and chose not to show it, but every subtle gesture mattered. A tilt of her head, a glance over her shoulder, the way she adjusted her necklace with the faintest grace. I couldn't help but notice how natural she seemed in her skin, and how completely I was captivated by it. I remember the brief moment when our hands brushed accidentally as I handed her sister a drink. The touch was fleeting, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but to me, it felt electric, warm, soft, grounding. Even the sounds of the room seemed to sharpen around her. The clink of glasses, the hum of conversation, the laughter of children in the background. She moved through it all like she belonged to another world, yet I felt a connection that made that world feel strangely accessible. I wanted to speak, to find a reason to be near her, but something held me back. The sister's words echoed in my mind again. "This stays between us." I wasn't supposed to rush, to act, or even admit how drawn I felt. That evening ended, but the feeling lingered. I couldn't stop replaying the brief exchanges, the secretive tension, the soft warmth of a fleeting touch. The story hadn't even begun, and yet, the emotional thread had already been pulled taut. I was aware of a pull, subtle but insistent, guiding me toward someone I barely knew, but already felt like I couldn't ignore. By the time I left that night, one thing was certain. This wasn't just a fleeting crush. There was an unspoken understanding, a quiet invitation to something more, and a secret between us that promised to change everything. Even after that first evening, I couldn't shake her from my mind. It wasn't just her beauty, though that was impossible to ignore. It was the way she carried herself, the subtle intelligence in her eyes, the calm that seemed to surround her. I found myself replaying every detail. The gentle rise of her laugh, the way she tilted her head when she was curious, the warmth of her hand brushing against mine for just a heartbeat. Those moments, fleeting as they were, lingered in my memory like the echo of a song I didn't know the words to, yet couldn't stop humming. Everywhere I went, little reminders of her appeared. A familiar scent in the air made my chest tighten. I caught myself smiling at the memory of the warmth in her eyes, the subtle kindness in her gestures, the way she seemed fully present in a room yet aware of everything. I realized I was noticing things about her no one else did. How her fingers moved when she spoke, the small crease between her brows when she concentrated, the way her shoulders relaxed when she was at ease. The sister, too, seemed aware of this growing tension. Whenever we were alone, she would lean in slightly, her voice just a whisper. "Remember, this stays between us." The repetition of the phrase carried a strange weight. It was a warning, a nudge, and an invitation all at once. It made me feel trusted, and yet the secrecy only intensified the intrigue. I wanted to be closer to her, to speak, to laugh, to somehow let her know the effect she had on me, but I was caught between desire and hesitation. I tried to convince myself that it was just admiration, that maybe I was reading too much into fleeting moments. But my mind betrayed me. I found myself imagining what it would be like to speak to her again, to hear her voice alone in a quiet room, to feel the subtle warmth of her hand linger a moment longer than necessary. I began noticing patterns. The way she always preferred small gestures over grand statements, the gentle rhythm in which she moved through life, and the way her eyes held stories she didn't always share. Each time I thought I could move on, some memory or detail brought her back. Like the way her laughter reached across the room, soft yet commanding attention, or the way she tilted her head and smiled when she noticed I was watching. Even mundane moments were electric. The way her fingers brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, or how her gaze would linger just a second too long, filled with unspoken understanding. It became clear that this wasn't a passing infatuation. The attraction was quiet, but it was anchored in something deeper. Curiosity, admiration, and an unspoken recognition of connection. Every memory, every fleeting touch, every secretive whisper from her sister built a tension that was both thrilling and frightening. I realized I was stepping into something I didn't fully understand, yet couldn't ignore, and the thought of seeing her again made my heart race with a mixture of anticipation and dread. By the end of that week, she had occupied nearly every quiet thought, every idle moment, every dream of possibility. The story was no longer about fleeting fascination. It had begun to root itself in something profoundly personal. And with every recollection, every lingering thought, the quiet tension between us grew stronger, like a thread slowly tightening, drawing us toward a connection that neither of us could yet name. Life has a way of forcing people together in the most ordinary yet extraordinary ways. For me, it was a series of small, almost accidental moments that made the connection between us undeniable. Perhaps it was the universe nudging us closer, or perhaps it was simply the natural pull that had begun the first evening. Either way, every encounter felt charged with something unspoken, each brush of her hand or accidental proximity sending a quiet thrill through me. It started innocently enough. I was helping her sister with some preparations for a weekend gathering, and she appeared to offer her assistance as well. She moved with that effortless grace I couldn't stop noticing, and our paths crossed repeatedly, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not. Each time, there was a fleeting closeness, a momentary warmth of shared space. My arm brushed against hers while passing a tray of drinks. Her hand lingered slightly as she adjusted my sleeve, and our eyes met with unspoken acknowledgement. It was subtle, yet each small touch seemed magnified, like the world had quieted around us for just a heartbeat. The accidental nature of these interactions made them more intoxicating. Sitting close together on the same couch while sorting items, I became acutely aware of the rhythm of her breathing, the soft hum of her voice as she laughed at some private joke. Every time she leaned in to speak, her hair brushed my shoulder, and I could feel the warmth radiating from her presence. She seemed perfectly at ease, unaware, or perhaps purposefully aware, of the tension her proximity created. Each moment was a delicate dance. We were near, but the rules of restraint hung in the air, unspoken yet palpable. Her sister, ever the silent observer, would occasionally catch my eye and offer a faint smile, almost imperceptible, reminding me of the secret I carried. "This stays between us," I remembered her whispering before. That secrecy added layers to every glance, every accidental touch. It was thrilling to navigate, knowing that our growing connection existed in a delicate balance between openness and discretion. There were also quiet moments outside the chaos of gatherings. Helping her carry groceries, walking together down a tree-lined street, or waiting for the same bus. These small encounters felt like they had been orchestrated by fate. I found myself noticing how her fingers would lightly brush mine when handing me something, or how her gaze would linger just a second longer than necessary. She radiated warmth in the most ordinary moments, and yet I felt as if each touch, each smile, carried the weight of something deeper. Even in silence, our connection spoke volumes. Sitting across from her, our knees nearly touching, I could feel the energy between us, subtle but insistent. There was no need for words. The small gestures, the accidental closeness, the lingering glances. They said everything that wasn't spoken. I realized I was no longer merely fascinated by her. I was drawn into a quiet orbit around her, tethered by the magnetic pull of shared moments and the intoxicating tension that grew with each accidental touch. By the end of these encounters, it was clear. What had started as curiosity and admiration was evolving into something more. Something quiet, electric, and impossible to ignore. And yet, the most thrilling part was that it all felt unintentional, as if the universe was giving us permission to get closer, one accidental brush, one lingering glance at a time. As our accidental closeness became more frequent, I found myself caught between fascination and hesitation. Every time I was near her, my chest tightened. Not with fear, but with a mixture of longing and doubt. I was painfully aware of the unspoken rules, the boundaries we were tiptoeing around. She was older, confident, worldly in ways I was still learning to navigate. And there was her sister, the silent guardian of both her trust and our budding connection. Every glance, every small touch carried weight now, and I couldn't ignore it. The conflict started in quiet moments, when we were alone together for just a few minutes. I would catch myself reaching for a shared item, maybe a glass or a book, and our hands would brush. My pulse would spike, my breath catching for just a fraction of a second. She noticed. I could feel her awareness in the softening of her gaze, the subtle tilt of her head, the faint smile that suggested she understood the struggle I hadn't yet voiced. Her calmness was both a comfort and a torment. I longed to speak, to close the distance between us, but the weight of propriety held me back. There were evenings when her sister would leave the room for a moment, and we'd be alone with the quiet hum of conversation, laughter, or music around us. It was in those small pockets of time that I felt the magnetic pull most acutely. A hand brushing mine while passing a tray, a lingering look while sharing a private joke. Every gesture was amplified, every second stretched. I became hyper-aware of the way her shoulder relaxed when she was comfortable, the soft warmth radiating from her presence, and the subtle cues in her body language that communicated a mixture of invitation and restraint. But alongside the pull, there was hesitation. I wrestled with my thoughts. Was I overstepping? Did she feel the same pull? Or was it just my own imagination? The age gap, the social dynamics, the sister's watchful eyes, they all pressed against the desire building inside me. Each time I considered reaching out further, I reminded myself, patience, subtlety, respect. The tension was as much about restraint as it was about longing. During one quiet evening, I noticed her vulnerability. Not in words, but in small signs. A fleeting sigh, a pause in her usual composure, the way she lingered on a thought before responding. It was subtle, but it invited me in, asked me to notice, to understand, to care. And I did. I wanted to be the one she could trust, the one who could meet her in those moments without judgment or expectation. The more I observed her, the more I realized that the connection we were building wasn't just attraction. It was intimacy in its purest form. Every accidental touch, every shared silence, every glance carried a meaning that words could not express. I understood, finally, that navigating this bond required patience, sensitivity, and an honest acknowledgement of our emotions. I wasn't just drawn to her body or her presence. I was drawn to her essence, the quiet strength she carried, and the way she allowed me to glimpse the vulnerability beneath it. By the end of these realizations, I was caught in a delicate balance, craving closeness while honoring boundaries, feeling desire while practicing restraint. The tension was exquisite, electric, and almost unbearable, but it was also real. And in that conflict, I began to understand the depth of what was unfolding between us, knowing that patience and awareness were as much a part of this slow-burning connection as the moments of accidental closeness that had brought us here. The first 4 parts of our connection had been a careful dance of glances, fleeting touches, and accidental proximity. But then something happened that changed the rhythm entirely. An unexpected moment that stripped away pretense and forced honesty. It wasn't dramatic, not in the cinematic sense. It was quiet, almost imperceptible, but it carried a weight I had never felt before. It began with a shared vulnerability. Perhaps it was a minor crisis or a moment of unguarded confession. Something that left her exposed in a way only a few people ever saw. Maybe she spoke of a fear, a regret, or a memory that tugged at the edges of her composure. I felt the pull immediately. The urge to comfort, to be present, to silently assure her that she wasn't alone. And in that moment, the invisible boundary between us felt thinner, almost non-existent. We sat close together, naturally gravitating to the same quiet corner of the room, as though the universe had arranged it for us. Her hand brushed mine. Not intentionally, perhaps, but with a weight that made my chest tighten. I wanted to pull away, to preserve decorum, but her warmth and the unspoken trust in her gaze anchored me. For a heartbeat, it was as if the rest of the world had melted away. No sister's watchful eyes, no social expectations, just the quiet presence of two people who had silently built a bridge between them. The conversation was gentle yet revealing. She spoke and I listened, not just with my ears, but with my heart. I noticed the small, intimate details. The subtle tremor in her voice when she admitted something private, the way her fingers lingered over a surface, the way her eyes searched mine for understanding. Every gesture, every pause, every sigh added layers to the unspoken tension that had been building since the first night. Physical closeness, previously accidental, became more intentional, but still discreet. Our hands met briefly, holding for just a moment longer than necessary. When she leaned in to whisper a thought, her hair brushed my cheek, leaving a warmth that lingered long after she pulled back. Even sitting side by side, the small space between us felt charged. Our shoulders occasionally touching, our knees brushing, our breathing synchronized in the quiet lull between words. It was a slow, intoxicating dance of connection, one that required no explicit declarations to be understood. And yet, there was restraint. We both knew the stakes, the sisters' trust, the social boundaries, the whisper of morality that hovered in the background. That tension made the moments more potent, every touch and glance laden with meaning, every silence pregnant with possibility. I became acutely aware of the fragility of what we were building. One wrong move could shatter the delicate balance we had nurtured so carefully. By the end of that turning point, something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't just fascinated by her anymore. I was tethered to her, emotionally and intimately, in a way that transcended words. The attraction had deepened into trust, admiration, and the quiet recognition that we were becoming essential to each other. And though the path forward was uncertain, I knew that whatever came next, whether joy, heartbreak, or something in between, our connection had reached a point of no return. After that turning point, everything subtly shifted. The quiet tension between us, once delicate and fragile, now had substance. It was no longer just accidental touches and fleeting glances. It had become a mutual understanding, a silent language that only the two of us could speak. Every encounter carried a familiarity that was intimate yet unspoken, and I felt more attuned to her moods, her gestures, her silences than ever before. We began to navigate the space between us with care and intentionality. Sitting together became comfortable rather than accidental. When our hands brushed, it was no longer a fleeting thrill but a moment of connection, acknowledged and understood. A small touch on the arm while sharing a laugh, a hand resting briefly on the small of her back while passing through a doorway. These gestures carried weight, yet remained tender and respectful. Each moment built trust, layering a foundation of emotional intimacy that words alone could not convey. Her presence became a grounding force in my life. Even in ordinary settings, a quiet conversation over coffee, a shared walk in the park, or helping her carry groceries, I felt the magnetism of our bond. She had a way of noticing the smallest details about me, the things I tried to hide or ignore, the tension in my shoulders, the flicker of doubt in my eyes, or the quiet excitement I tried to suppress. Her acknowledgement, subtle yet perceptible, made me feel seen in a way few people ever had. We also began to discuss our feelings, though cautiously. Conversations were gentle, sometimes indirect, yet honest. We acknowledged the age difference, the societal expectations, and the sisters' trust, all while recognizing the bond that had formed between us. The dialogue was not about overt declarations of love, but about understanding each other, validating the emotions that had grown quietly over weeks and months. These talks deepened the intimacy, creating a sense of emotional safety where vulnerability was welcomed rather than feared. Physical closeness became even more meaningful. A lingering shoulder touch, a subtle hand squeeze, or the briefest brush of fingers was enough to communicate what words could not. We laughed softly when caught in these moments, understanding the tension and thrill without needing to speak it aloud. Her eyes often held a softness, a quiet acknowledgement that we were in this together, even if we could not fully define it yet. What struck me most was how effortless it all felt despite the complexity beneath it. There was no rush, no pressure, only a natural unfolding of connection. We had crossed the line from fascination to something more profound, a delicate mix of admiration, desire, trust, and understanding. The mutual acknowledgement of what existed between us made every small gesture, every shared smile, every whispered conversation feel sacred. By the end of this stage, I realized that we were no longer merely two people caught in a flirtatious tension. We had become partners in our own secret world, a bond defined by respect, emotional honesty, and subtle, YouTube-safe intimacy. The unspoken understanding between us was as powerful as any declaration, and I knew that whatever came next, we were ready to face it together, in our own careful, deliberate way. After months of quiet tension, subtle touches, and whispered conversations, the story of our connection reached its natural conclusion. The moments that had once been accidental, the brief brush of fingers, the shared glances, the lingering smiles, had now become conscious, deliberate gestures of care and affection. The magnetic pull between us was no longer a secret thrill. It had matured into an understanding, a bond that neither of us could ignore, yet neither needed to define hastily. The final resolution wasn't marked by grand declarations or dramatic confessions, but by a profound sense of completeness. We found ourselves together in a quiet, unassuming moment, perhaps sitting on a park bench at dusk, the world softly muted around us, or leaning against the doorway of a familiar room. Her hand found mine naturally, and this time I didn't hesitate. The warmth of her fingers in mine carried all the words we had never said, all the tension we had felt, and all the trust that had grown between us. There was a beauty in how effortless it felt. No one else needed to know, and in that secrecy lay a comfort we both treasured. Her sister's earlier words, "This stays between us," no longer felt like a warning but like a promise that our bond was safe, sacred, and shared only by those who mattered most. The secrecy had been the foundation, and now the intimacy, built on patience and mutual understanding, was the reward. In this final part, the emotional intimacy took center stage. We leaned into quiet moments. A soft brush of hair from her cheek, a subtle resting of my hand on her back as we walked side by side, a lingering gaze that spoke volumes. Each touch, each look, was measured yet meaningful. YouTube-safe gestures that communicated desire, care, and connection without needing to cross boundaries. Every small gesture became a language of its own, conveying trust, admiration, and affection. We spoke openly, gently acknowledging the path we had traveled together. The age difference, once a source of hesitation, was now a facet of our understanding, a reminder of the experiences she carried and the perspective I brought. We didn't need to overstate it. Our actions, our glances, and our quiet companionship said everything that words could not. There was a sense of harmony, a delicate balance between desire and respect, closeness and patience, affection and propriety. By the end of that evening or that shared moment in time, we reached a place of emotional resolution. Whether we remained together, quietly navigating our feelings in secret, or parted with the comfort of knowing we had profoundly impacted each other, there was no doubt that the bond we had forged was lasting. The story closed not on uncertainty, but on understanding, the knowledge that we had touched each other's lives in ways both subtle and unforgettable. As we finally separated for the night, our fingers lingered just a moment longer, A smile passed silently between us, and I felt the quiet power of what we had built. It was a connection born of patience, trust, and respect. A slow-burn romance that had grown naturally, tenderly, and irrevocably. And in that lingering touch, that shared look, I knew that the story, while ending, had left a mark that neither of us would ever forget. If this slow-burn romance touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more stories of forbidden attraction, unexpected connections, and age gap romance. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced a connection that had to stay secret? Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that makes your heart race.